Seattle News Weekly from Fox 13.
Welcome to Seattle News Weekly. I'm Bill Wixey, and today we are taking a deep dive on what's happening in our nation's capital. The president addressing the nation last night, assumingly he was going to be talking about the economy, and he said everything is just fine, but consumer prices are rising, and there's much to discuss about what's happening in Washington, D.C., and my guest today is Seattle U political science professor Patrick Schoettmer, who's been on our morning show many, many times to break this down. We appreciate you coming in and joining the podcast today.
Yeah, absolutely happy to be here.
Okay, just in general, how much do people think about the government outside of an election cycle? Is it largely dependent on how it's affecting them personally?
So most voters have only intermittent amounts of attention they pay to the government. It somewhat depends on where you are in life. Older voters, particularly retired voters, tend to consume more news information in general, so they tend to pay more attention to politics. People raising kids, they only pay attention when they have to. Some people tune in for entertainment, but most Americans only really start paying attention to what the government's doing in the last month or two before an election.
So President Trump addressing the nation last night, and he was saying not a whole lot, really. I mean, it was an 18-minute address to the people. He seemed to be rushing through it. A lot of people thought he was going to be addressing consumer prices, potentially the situation in Venezuela. We didn't get a lot of that. He was just saying that the administration is doing great. The economy is great. Everyone's going to get tax breaks. They're going to love this. The stock market is great. The economy is great. But it's simply not true. I mean, consumer prices are a real issue. Everybody has noticed that everything has gone up. How much of that is directly related to tariffs?
So economists are estimating that about 0.7% of the amount of inflation we're seeing right now is due to the tariffs. We had about a 2.7 or 2.9% inflation rate. It would have been about 2.2 without the tariffs. So it's about $1,000 more on your annual expenditures that they're saying is pretty much directly attributable to the Trump tariffs.
And the reason why we haven't seen tariffs in a very, very long time is because of consumer prices. I mean, the tariffs are a way to basically tax the people in a way, because we're paying more for everyday goods. The free trade agreements allowed consumer prices to stay low for a long, long time. In your opinion, and what you discuss in class, do you think that tariffs are good economic policy?
So tariffs definitely have their place. They're a tool that governments can use to protect particular economies. And if they want to try to promote domestic production in a particular industry like steel or automotive manufacturing, you can tariff cars produced in other places to make them more expensive relative to the cars made in the U.S., and then that could encourage domestic production and could be beneficial. We see this a lot in developing countries. They will tariff certain industries they see as really important to building up their own internal economies. But if you depend on things coming from outside of the country to produce what you're making internally, then it winds up not having that effect that you're going for.
Okay, so President Trump has in the past, he didn't last night, but he has in the past referred to the consumer price crisis, as some have called it, as a Democratic hoax. He didn't say that last night, but he has shifted blame on Biden, and he says our country was dead a year ago, and now we're the greatest economy in the world. It's all Joe Biden's fault. Well, I mean, in some regards, maybe, but we did come out of a pandemic and we did avoid a recession, and that's a minor win there. But now everything is kind of stagnant with the economy. Where do you see the economy now, and where do you see it headed on its current trajectory?
Well, the real question I think a lot of political observers have about the president's speech is that while the president's rhetoric is really good at focusing people's attention, it's not really good at moving public opinion. And we've been seeing public opinion move away from, this is partly Biden's fault, which the public more or less was going along with for the first 6 months or so of his presidency, to now them seeing Trump as mostly or wholly owning this issue. And by having this speech, all he's really doing is highlighting concerns that voters are already telling us are top of mind for for their households. And with the increase in unemployment, we did see a little bit of a tick down in the inflation rate in the most recent result. But with the rise of unemployment, I think a lot of voters are getting anxious about whether or not we're moving towards a recession. I think economists are fairly mixed on this. They see one as being potentially in the future, but not definitely certain. But I think that's what voters are really worrying about right now.
Trump is seeing a bit of a slide in his approval numbers. The latest numbers show a slight uptick, but they were as low as they've been in his second term. A national Washington Post average of national polls so far in December found 39% of Americans approve of the job that Trump is doing, 57% disapprove. On the economy in particular, the average is slightly worse for Trump, 36% approving, 58% disapproving. Now, how does this factor into the midterms now? And what do you think the Republican feeling is right now as they head towards the midterms and the very real possibility they could lose the House and or the Senate?
Well, this polling we see right now won't determine the election outcome in November, but it will begin to set the stage for the conversation. And the moves Trump is making right now, giving the speech that focuses affordability, or in the House we see them now setting up to have a debate in January over expired health care premiums. These are not conversations Republicans want to be having in a year that's already looking bad for them, given how negative public perceptions of the president's performance is.
Are there any indications that the MAGA base is eroding for the president?
We have seen some polling looking at Republicans in particular, where they're asking the question, do you identify more as a MAGA Republican, or do you identify more as a mainstream or traditional Republican? And it was about 2/3 MAGA Republican, 1/3 traditional Republican back in the beginning of the year. And the most recent polling is showing it at about 50-50. So there are within the Republican Party itself, you're beginning to see some Republicans move away from this MAGA identification, and you've started seeing more Republicans push back against the president. Perhaps most visibly has been the back and forth between Marjorie Taylor Greene and President Trump.
Yeah, a major defection in the MAGA base there. Let's talk about Venezuela. Trump posting yesterday that Venezuela is completely surrounded by the largest armada ever assembled in the history of South America. He says it will only get bigger, and the shock to them will be like nothing they've ever seen until such time as they return to the United States of America all of the oil, land, and other assets that they previously stole from us. Venezuela denouncing the move, and Nicolas Maduro labeled as a foreign terrorist organization leader. What the heck is going on in Venezuela, and what is the end game for the Trump administration there?
Well, the Trump administration has long had a hostile relationship with Venezuela. In his first term, there was an attempted coup against Maduro that the U.S. Supported, although it was quickly snuffed out. We saw elections earlier this year that had significant irregularities that suggested Maduro probably lost, but he wound up being able to retain control. The U.S., again, very strong in condemnation there. And so the relations between the U.S. and Venezuela have not been good for years.
What is he saying when he says that they stole stuff from us?
Well, Venezuela, a while ago under Chavez, nationalized the oil industry. There was, at previous time, foreign investment and foreign control of certain oil production facilities. When it was nationalized, the state just took all of those over and began running the oil industry itself. And it now makes up the most important part of the state's budget. So the economy of Venezuela, particularly the public sector economy of the Venezuela, it depends on oil to flow.
So the president claims that he's solved 8 wars in 10 months or something, but going to war with Venezuela seems to be a very real possibility. I mean, you don't have an armada like that off the shore unless you plan to do something about it. Are we going to go to war with Venezuela?
It's hard to say. The U.S. has a long history of interventionism in Latin America. Many presidents have had some sort of adventure or expedition or invasion, depending on whose point of view you're looking from. Like from the first President Bush's intervention into Panama to go after President Noriega. Woodrow Wilson invaded Mexico, so on and so forth. So you can never rule out the possibility that the U.S. is going to invade Venezuela, but President Trump himself has always been skittish about committing troops to any sort of foreign invasion. And if we do see troops moving into Venezuela, I think that there would be another sort of rebellion in the parts of the MAGA base that are particularly isolationist and opposed to seeing American troops being deployed abroad.
Another thing that Trump is posting about from time to time, he's pushing for a GOP vote to abolish the filibuster, claiming the Democrats are, quote, looking to obliterate the Supreme Court. What exactly is he talking about, and why is he pushing so hard to abolish the filibuster? Because it could very well backfire on Republicans when the Democrats get control.
So the filibuster is an old hangover of the tradition of unlimited debate that emerged early on in the Senate. The House of Representatives actually had a filibuster back in the day. It worked a little bit differently than the Senate, but they had one as well that was abolished in the 19th century. But the Senate filibuster has continued on. The main change we've seen in the filibuster in the past 20 years was the transition from using the filibuster only in extraordinary circumstances to making it as a standard part of Senate procedure. We saw that move under Mitch McConnell under President Obama. And because of that, it's become increasingly difficult for Congress to do basically anything because you have to have a supermajority in the Senate. And so people on the right and on the left have been calling for the filibuster to be removed for different reasons. There's a lot that President Biden could have perhaps pushed through if he only needed 50 votes. There's a lot more President Trump could do if he only needed 50 votes. It's people in the Senate themselves that oppose it, because if you move away from that supermajority requirement to a mere majority requirement, it weakens the power of individual senators, which limits to some degree their ability to protect the interests of their state. And we do tend to see members of the Senate behave a little bit more independently from the White House than members of the House. So there's a lot more concern about senatorial prerogative, there's a lot more concern about being able to push for what your state needs or the sorts of investments you want to see in the state that makes senators themselves reluctant to end the filibuster.
Donald Trump is 79 years old, and he has been caught sleeping in meetings. He's floated the idea, and he has from the beginning, of running for a third term. That would require a change to the Constitution to allow him to run as the candidate for a third time. But he has indicated that there are ways around this. What is he talking about, and how could that possibly play out?
Well, there have been a couple theories floated by supporters of his. Mostly they center around the argument of interpreting the amendment to the Constitution limiting people to 2 terms as meaning 2 consecutive terms. And his argument, or the argument of supporters who want him to run for another term, is that because there is an interruption of the 4 years of the Biden administration between his first and his second term, that means that this particular restriction doesn't apply to him. Looking at the face of the amendment, that probably is not the case, but because this has never been tested, ultimately, if he decided to run for another term, this would be something that would go before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court would weigh in on their interpretation. So
Trump is a really interesting character. Very cantankerous, combative, vindictive. But he is a political survivor, the likes of which we have never seen. He's also a celebrity, and he's got this charisma that his base just eat up. They want him cantankerous, they want him combative. He calls a reporter piggy. They celebrate this. It's interesting to me. Is it a personality thing with him? What is the real secret sauce there with Donald Trump? And is there anybody else in the political landscape that could captivate that portion of America the way that he has?
Well, in political science, we tend to call political parties that are centered around a particular charismatic individual a personalist party. And parties that are personalist parties tend to break down their rigid ideological commitments and tend to just go along with whatever the leader wants. And you see some of that emerging in the Republican Party. But the nature of American politics is such that both parties have to be somewhat broad coalitions in order to be competitive. Trump's ability to push the party towards his personal preferences or his personal idiosyncrasies do remind us of people like Silvio Berlusconi in Italy, or Juan Perón in Argentina, for example. And so he does seem to have this power, this influence over the Republican Party that other people on the left or the right have not had in the past. Probably the closest comparison to that prior to Trump would be the influence that Franklin Roosevelt had over the Democratic Party, the personal commitment to Roosevelt as a leader himself. And he was also the first and only president to have more than 2 terms in office. But Roosevelt, even though he was less healthy than Trump, was a lot younger at this stage. We see Trump slowing down in some of the same ways we saw Biden slowing down while he was in office. And so whether or not he's going to be able to keep up this charismatic attack on rivals within his party and across the aisle, I think is something we're going to have to wait and see. I have my doubts that he'll be able to keep it up, but...
Is there anybody on the political landscape that you could see having a similar effect over a large number of the populace?
It's hard, I think, to build this sort of cult of personality. I don't think anyone expected Trump to be able to do that when he was first running in 2015.
Yeah.
But I do think his success at it points us to the way that politics and entertainment are continuing to fuse together, particularly as people are less involved in their communities and people are less connected to one another because of social media. We see these parasocial relationships between individuals and celebrities beginning to form. And many of these celebrities, because of this close contact, because of social media, begin to feel like quasi-friends. And I think Trump's bombast and his, to some degree, his lack of elocution, his simplistic speech, helps others to feel connected to him, to feel that they resonate or he understands where they're coming from. He often calls himself a blue-collar billionaire and approaches being wealthy in a way that I think a lot of regular folks feel like they might approach it too. So I think there's this lot of personal affection that would be hard to replicate for anyone else in the Republican or the Democratic Party.
Patrick Schoettmer is a political science professor at Seattle U University. Thank you so much. A really great perspective.
Thank you.
Good to have you today. And don't forget, new episodes of Seattle News Weekly podcast come out every Thursday. You can watch them on the Fox Local app, fox13seattle.com, or the Fox 13 Seattle YouTube channel. And you can also listen anywhere you get your podcast. We will see you again next week.
Seattle News Weekly is available wherever you get your podcast.